Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to your Side Quest Contact. We're now in part six of our Running the Game series, talking about plans, tips, strategies, frames of mind when you're actually running your game. Now we left off. We were in combat mode, right? And I described how in my mind, as I'm running the game, I have two modes really in my mind. I have the story mode and I have the combat mode. We covered story mode in the very beginning. We started talking about combat mode last time, and we're going to kind of continue talking a little bit more about combat mode, and then kind of use some more points to transition into more, just kind of like tips and game theory and such. So with combat mode, let me kind of go to my notes here. Now, one of the ways, because we talked yesterday, right? Or not yet, yeah, I think it was yesterday, but we talked about how we want the combat to be smooth, we want it to be engaging and interesting, and not just a boring grinding out of die rolling until something hits 0 hit points. So, one way to do that is to allow the players to be creative. Now, what do I mean by that? Allow the players to be creative. When they ask questions about their environment, they're trying to plan their actions, right? They're trying to think about what's around me, what can I do. If they ask, something like, "Is there a particular type of object around?" And if that makes sense for that environment, say, "Yeah, there's that object around." Let's say they're in a room and one of them doesn't have a weapon for some reason, right? They're looking around, there's a fireplace. They may ask, "Is there a fire poker near the fireplace?" Sure, yeah, there's a fire poker near the fireplace. It makes sense for there to be a fire poker near the fireplace. So they can grab that, use that as a temporary makeshift weapon, and allow them to get creative. I have one player who likes to create little fire bombs. When we stop at a town, at a city, one of the things he does, he goes shopping, finds the ingredients, vials, jars, oils, and such, and he likes to create these fire bombs. Now, I couldn't really find a specific firebomb like stat block on what it does, so we kind of made it up. Yeah, you can make a firebomb, sure, that makes sense. You put some oil in a jar, put some shrapnel in there, some ball bearings or whatnot. Yeah, because what he was doing was he was going through the player's handbook, looking at all the equipment and thinking, how could I use some of this stuff? And you want to allow that to encourage that. So that way it's not just, all right, got my sword, here's my attack, here's my two attacks, oh, here's my bonus action attack, all right, that's it. Allow them to think outside the box of just, rolling an attack score. And don't be afraid of quote unquote power gamers, right? Power. One of the We're going to talk about play style in a little bit, but power gamers they're the ones who will look through the rules and look for every advantage, every rule they can stack on top of another rule to give them every advantage. And that's okay, right? That's fine. That's how they enjoy playing. It's just as a legitimate play style as the socialite. We'll talk about those a little more here. So, when they're doing these things, when they're coming up with these ideas, encourage it, and then let the dice determine if it works or not. It may be a cool idea, but maybe the villain overcomes it. The crit 20 or crit 1 on the player. Something can happen, but still allow the thinking outside of the box. And the biggest way I can think of to do that is just to be very flexible when they ask about what's around them. Is this around? Is that around? Can I grab this? Can I use that? Yes. And as long as yes makes sense, you make that your answer. Yeah. Is a fire poker near the fireplace. Now, another thing I want to talk about, is because this is a real life thing that happened not too recently. But when dice are not cooperating with a player or players, right? Give you a little brief example. In a game I'm playing in, we had like maybe 2 or 3 sessions where our paladin just could not roll over a 10. Just would not happen. The D20 just would not go over a 10 for some reason, like all game. And it spilled into another game. So that can get kind of discouraging, right? If you're that player and everything you try fails, well, you tend to get a little discouraged with that. So what do we do about that, right? How do we keep that player engaged? How do we keep that player from saying, "That's it, I'm done, I don't want to play anymore"? And one way I have found in my games to keep that player going, right, keep that player encouraged, is that offer little bits of encouragement. When they want to do something, if they think outside the box, say, "Hey, that's a good idea. Yeah, that fire poker's there by the fireplace. Go grab it." Anything that you can, any success that you can give them outside of a die roll will help counter the discouragement they feel when the dice aren't cooperating. And then when they do succeed at something, make that a big deal. Whatever it is they succeeded in, that thing, that action, that decision, whatever it is going to propel the players forward. It's going to give them a big advantage. So that way they feel, yes, finally, I succeeded. It was a big deal, and all my failures now have built up, and now I'm very successful at what I tried to do. So we have a very accomplished feeling, right? And which in a way is a little bit more of a better of a feeling. I know that's poor grammar. I'm sorry. Than succeeding all the way through. Like if you fail, and then boom, you hit a big success. That's a big rush, right? That's like, yes, I did that. Because if you succeed all the time, well, then that just becomes standard, right? So give that player a big moment. Their dice aren't cooperating. Find little ways to give them successes that are outside the die rolls. Can I find this object? Yes. Can I do this type of thing? Yes. Again, as long as these things make sense, right? You don't want your wizard with 8 strength saying, "Hey, is there a great sword hanging on the wall? Can I grab that?" Well, yeah, but it's not going to do you much good. Things like that. Now, so we're going to move on a little bit here. We're going to talk about player styles, and what happens at your table if we got a player and another player that aren't on the same play style. The first thing we got to accept is that all play styles are legitimate, right? There's no play style that is wrong, right? If someone tells you you're doing it wrong, the only again, my only rule is if my players are having a good time and if they will come back next session, I'm doing it right. Don't care what anyone else thinks, to be honest. And players should have that kind of same thing. Like, this is how I like to play. If I can't find a game that fits my play style, so be it. I'll find, I'll eventually will. So let's talk about some play styles. We mentioned one, right? We mentioned the power gamer, the one who scours the rules, looking for every conceivable dice rolling advantage. Maybe I should spell correctly. My spelling and grammar is a little off today. And then we have our socialite, right? This is the high charisma player. Bard, paladin, cleric, someone who likes to be involved with other people, is very high into role playing, likes to, performance, perception, deception, those types of things are big with the socialite. Then what I call the battle master, right? Someone who wants to fight, right? I don't want to talk. I don't want to investigate. Where's the enemy? Where's the who do I roll my d20 against, or whatever attack roll you're using for whatever game you're using. And then We have the psychopath, the one who just wants to kill things, right? Now, there's going to be more. These are just kind of four basic ones that I kind of form in my mind as I'm thinking about players and play styles. We got some. There's probably others. There's probably sub styles that go under that as well. But what do we do? Like, how do we keep players of opposing styles engaged, interested, and participating? Right. Well, one way is that to make sure the players know what kind of game we're going into before they make their characters. So that way, if you are planning a game with high levels of intrigue and interaction, politics and such, that the players can make characters appropriately. If it's going to be a, epic quest where you're traveling across countrysides and fighting monsters and such, well, the players need to know that so that they can make their characters appropriately. Now, as a real world example, one error I made when setting up a game, and it wasn't like a huge error, we all still had fun, but we could have had a little bit more fun if I had prepared properly. And it was Spelljammer. Now, we were setting up Spelljammer. I told everyone this is what we're playing. We're playing Spelljammer, right? And if you're not familiar with that, what it is it's essentially D&D, but out in space. But they call it the Astral Sea, and the rules of physics in real life and the rules of D&D Astral Sea physics are very, very different. Anyway, you get to fly a ship, right? You get to fly a magical ship through the Astral Sea and deal with all the stuff that's out there. Now, when the players on session one, when they discovered the ship and they got into it and it started taking off, half of the players were totally surprised by this, right? Like I had no idea we were going flying on a ship through space, and at the end of the session, we're talking, and I was like, "What do you mean? This was a Spelljammer game. That's what that is." And like we didn't know what Spelljammer was. So, oh, okay, okay. So, and I was, I even sent, here's what we're playing, Spelljammer. Sent them links, sent them stuff, check it out. But again, sometimes players don't have time to check all that stuff out. Now, ultimately, that game was fun, right? Even though, but if they had designed their characters to be members of a crew, of a ship crew, then they would have been a little more efficient. Their characters would have been created in a way that would have been what they're doing. Now, again, we still had a great time, right? We figured it out. The players who could get on the artillery did. The magic users or the spellcasters got into the spell jamming helm and flew the ship, and they figured it out. But if all the players were aware at the beginning of what they were doing, right? We're going to be flying a magical ship through the vastness of the astral sea. If they knew that, and if all of them had a clear understanding of that in the beginning, they would have made their characters that way. But again, we still had a good time, right? We got out there, flew around, dealt with gnolls and Yankee and mind flayers and all the horrible things that are out there. So making sure the players know what kind of game we're going to be dealing with is important, is helpful, because that way they'll get their characters in line to that. Now, another way, because you gotta be watchful, right? Remember, I said yesterday where it's okay to have a whole game session where not a single combat roll happens. You're figuring things out, you're investigating, you're moving around the city, you're talking to people, finding clues and such. Well, that might not be so fun for a player whose play style is heavily combat based. So, when you go through a session, right, if there's no fighting that happens in a session, you don't want to force it, right? You don't want to force a fight unnecessarily. But at the end of the session, if no fighting has occurred, maybe kind of give them a little preview. Say, oh man, y'all have figured a bunch of stuff out. Things are building up, and I'm thinking some conflicts coming soon. And that way, the players who do want to get in and scrap it out are like, oh, okay, okay, and they see the fight brewing. And let's go vice versa. Let's say you're having a very combat heavy session, because those happens too, right? A lot of times in my games, like we'll have a whole session that builds up to a big fight, and then the next session is that fight. There are players who might not be so combat oriented. So how do we get them engaged? We got to find a combat role for them that they can do. Now, in most games, and especially D&D Fifth Edition, most of the classes can have some kind of combat role. Some games there are classes that really aren't good at combat at all, even as a support. So find a way, right? And watch your players' reactions, right? Watch their faces, watch their body language, and when one of them is like, "Okay, we're all right, we got to talk to another person," okay, and then keep that in mind, right? That player is getting a little antsy. I need to find something for that player to get them back engaged. And for the most part, I don't really have a lot of conflict at the table. I think just my style of running the game is to be inclusive of everyone. I'm like in my mind, I have a checklist. Did I engage this player? Did I engage that player? Did I engage, kind of going down the table or the virtual tabletop and making sure that I, engaged each player in some way through the game. So that way they feel engaged as well. So let's take a look at a couple more things before we wrap up today. It's good to have your tools ready. Tools are important because they help make our job a little easier. Now, one, if and I'm referencing D&D, but these concepts expand to any game. I'm just using D&D as an example because I have a lot of D&D stuff I can show as an example. Now, for D&D, one of the things that's important to know is like, difficulty. Let's find difficulty class. How hard is something to do? And this is a good chart to have handy. Now, moderate, DC 15, right? So hard, very hard, impossible. Normally, I don't go above 20. Like for me, 20 is this is like a very hard thing to do. And just naturally thinking, if I'm thinking I really don't want the players to do this, all right, the DC's 20. Maybe they hit it. If they hit it, they hit it, right? You can't back down, give them a roll, and then say, oh, it didn't work, right? You give them the DC and they hit it, you gotta follow through and you gotta let that thing happen. And in most things, like in like the books and the descriptions, they'll tell you what a DC is for something, but you might need to come up with the difficulty like on the fly, like they're doing something you didn't think of. Oh, how hard is it to do that thing? Have this chart handy, that way you can have a number in mind, or just have a preset number in mind, like 20. Okay, I don't know, it's really hard. All right, 20, and you can even go further. Nearly impossible 30, very hard 25. Random encounters. Let me. You gotta be careful with random encounters. First, I gotta find where I'm going. With random encounters, if you have a lot, if the players are traveling from point A to point B, and they already have like some planned out encounters, some story based encounters, maybe back off the random encounters for a little bit because they're already going to be doing things, and dealing with another random encounter again could put that player who's not so combat oriented in the again column. Now, if there's nothing happening, yeah, let's do some random encounters. And my kind of rule is, there are various rules and various ways to do it. But the way I like to do it is a roll, a d20 roll during the day, a d20 roll during the night. A 17 or higher indicates something's going to happen. So maybe it's happening while they're moving about during the day, or maybe it's happening while they're camped out and keeping watch at night. Now, let's see. Here we go. And you can build your own random encounters, or I have found this is pretty useful. Xanathar's Guide has a lot of pretty decent encounter tables. Like if I go to Forest here, It even gives me levels, force levels. And if I rolled a 17 or higher, next thing I'm rolling is this D100, and let's see what the players are gonna run into. Whatever it might be. Now I did write out one random encounter for the table for the Muse of Jajan. I didn't have access to this book at the time. I haven't purchased it, but I did use. I kind of based it off of an encounter table from Last Mine of Phandelver, where they have some because that's a beginning level, first level adventure. So I kind of modified that to what the Muse of Jajan was about, and you kind of use that. But for the rest, honestly, once I got a hold of this book, this resource, most of the time I just say, if you want to use random encounters, go here, if you have it. All right, sorry for the pause there. Okay, so we're talking about random encounters. All right, now I think I covered that. And then the last thing before we wrap up, have your tools ready, right? The difficulty charts, the encounters we talked about, maps, minis, virtual tabletop. Have that stuff kind of ready to go. That way the players arrive or they sign on, they get a feel immediately for what's going on, right? Because we want to get them immersed into our world, right? The whole point of this is to separate ourselves for a little bit from this dreary, realistic world and dive into a crazy fantasy world where we can do crazy things, and we want to get immersed into that. So getting prepared and having your tools ready is going to help with that. All right, I think we covered some good ground here. I'm going to kind of go to my overall notes and see what do we want to talk about next time. I think we're going to do this. Evil players and evil based campaigns. How do we handle those? I also want to cover some ground, some house rules that I use that may be helpful for you. Player rewards, yeah, that's a big part of it too, right? So we covered conflicting play. I'm just going to kind of put that up here. And then we have these topics we're going to talk about next time. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with me, and I hope this is helpful to you. Hope you have an enjoyable day, and I'll see you next time. Take care.